This is Carley. I just wanted to apologize for, uh, sorry. The back is not very happy. Anyway, I just wanted to apologize for the abrupt end to the last stream. I wasn't what annoyed me was that I wasn't done reading. I read two whole chapters. I looked up, the internet was out, and so the reason it abrupt ended was because the internet decided to go out. So I am super sorry about that. Hopefully that doesn't do it this time. The laptop has been doing that for a while. But we're going to try to get to where I had been last time. So, we had left off. I'll just read this. Don't mess with me, Peas. Now where did they go? Shan't say nothing if you don't say please, said Peas in his annoying sing-song voice. All right, please. Nothing! Told you I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please. Ha ha ha! And then they heard the sound of Pews whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. He thinks this door is locked, Harry whispered. I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville. For Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. What? Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what. For a moment, he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much on top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room, as he had supposed. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor on the third floor, and now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog, a dog that filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes and yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob between Filch and Death. He'd take Filch. They fell backward. Harry slammed the door shut, and they almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else because they didn't see him anywhere, but they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. We're on Orth. We're on Orth. That makes no sense. We're on Orth. Where on earth have you all been? She asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. Never mind that. Picks now, panted Harry, and the portrait swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling, into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville indeed looked as if he'd never speak again. What do they think they're doing keeping a thing like that locked up in school? Said Ron finally. If any dog needs exercise, that one does. Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you? She snapped. Didn't you see that, what it was standing on? The floor? Harry suggested. I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy with its head. No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door. It's obviously guarding something. She stood up, glaring at them. I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could all have been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed. Ron stared after her, his mouth open. No, we don't mind, he said. You'd think we dragged her along, wouldn't you? But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from Vault 713 was. Chapter 10, Halloween. Before we start this chapter, I wanted to let you know that this is one of my favorite chapters because this is where Hermione, Harry, and Ron first become friends in this chapter. Malfoy couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that Harry and Ron were still at Hogwarts the next day, looking tired but perfectly cheerful. Indeed, by the next morning, Harry and Ron thought that meeting the three-headed dog had been an excellent adventure, and they were quite keen on having another one. In the meantime, Harry filled Ron in about the package and seemed to have been moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts, and they spent a lot of time wondering what possibly could have been and such a need for heavy protection. It's either really valuable or really dangerous, said Ron. Or both, said Harry. As they knew for sure about the mysterious object was that it was about 2 inches long, they didn't have much chance of guessing what it was without further clues. Neither Neville nor Hermione showed the slightest interest in what lay underneath the dog and the trapdoor. All Neville cared about was never going near that dog again. Hermione was now refusing to speak to Harry and Ron, but she was such a bossy know-it-all they saw this as an added bonus. All they really wanted now was a way of getting back at Malfoy, and to their great delight, just such a thing arrived in the mail about a week later. All the owls flooded into the great hall as usual. Everyone's attention was caught by a long, thin package carried by 6 large screech owls. Harry was just as interested as everyone else to see what it was in the large parcel, and was amazed when the owls soared down and dropped it right in front of him, knocking his bacon to the floor. They had hardly fluttered out of the way when another owl dropped a letter on top of the parcel. Harry ripped open the letter first, which was lucky because it said, "Do not open the parcel at the table. It contains your new Nimbus 2000, but I don't want everybody knowing you've got a broomstick, or they'll all want one. Oliver Wood will meet you tonight on the Quidditch field at 7 o'clock for your first training session. Professor M. McGonagall." Harry had difficulty hiding his glee as he handed the note to Ron to read. "A Nimbus 2000, Ron moaned enviously. "I've never even touched one." They left the hall quickly, wanting to unwrap the broomstick in private before their first class, but halfway across the entrance hall, they found their way upstairs barred by Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy seized the package from Harry and felt it. "That's a broomstick," he said, throwing it back to Harry with a mixture of jealousy and spite on his face. "You'll be in for this party, bleh. You'll be in for it this time, Potter. First years aren't allowed them." Ron couldn't resist. "It's not any old broomstick," he said. "It's a Nimbus 2000. What did you say you had at home, Malfoy? A Comet 260?" Ron grinned at Harry. "Comets look flashy, but they're not in the same league as the Nimbus." "What would you know about it, Weasley? You couldn't afford half the handle," Malfoy snapped back. "I suppose you and your brothers have to save up twig by twig." Before Ron could answer, Professor Flitwick appeared at Malfoy's elbow. "Not arguing, I hope, boys," he squeaked. "Potter's been sent a broomstick, Professor," said Malfoy quickly. Yes, that's right," said Professor Flitwick, beaming at Harry. "Professor McGonagall told me all about the special circumstances, Potter. And what model is it?" "A Nimbus 2000, sir," said Harry, fighting not to laugh at the look of horror on Malfoy's face. And it's really thanks to Malfoy here that I've got it," he added. Harry and Ron headed upstairs, smothering their laughter at Malfoy's obvious rage and confusion. "Well, it's true," Harry chortled as they reached the top of the marble staircase. "If he hadn't stolen Neville's Rememberall, I wouldn't be on the team. So I suppose you think that's a reward for breaking rules," came an angry voice from behind them. Hermione was stomping up the stairs, looking disapprovingly at the package in Harry's hand. "I thought you weren't speaking to us," said Harry. "Yes, don't stop now," said Ron. "It's doing us so much good." Hermione marched away with her nose in the air. Harry had a lot of trouble keeping his mind on his lessons that day. It kept wandering up to the dormitory where his new broomstick was lying under his bed, or straying off to the Quidditch field where he'd be learning to play that night. He bolted his dinner that evening without noticing what he was eating, and then rushed upstairs with Ron to unwrap the Nimbus 2000 at last. Wow, Ron sighed as the broomstick rolled onto Harry's bedspread. Even Harry, who knew nothing about the different brooms, thought it looked wonderful. Sleek and shiny with a mahogany handle, it had a long tail of neat, straight twigs, and Nimbus 2000 written in gold near the top. As 7 o'clock drew near, Harry left the castle and set off in the dusk toward the Quidditch field. He'd never been inside the stadium before. Hundreds of seats were raised in stands where the field around the field so that the spectators were high enough to see what was going on. At either end of the field were three golden poles with hoops on the end. They reminded Harry of the little plastic sticks Muggles children blew bubbles through, except that they were 50 feet high. Too eager to fly again, to wait for wood, Harry mounted his broomstick and kicked off the ground. What a feeling! What a feeling! He swooped in and out of the goalpost and then sped up and down the field. The Nimbus 2000 turned wherever he wanted at his lightest touch. Hey Potter, come down! Oliver Wood had arrived. He was carrying a large wooden crate under his arm. Harry landed next to him. Very nice, said Wood, his eyes glinting. I see that what McGonagall meant. You really are a natural. I'm just going to teach you the rules this evening, then you'll be joining team practices 3 times a week. He opened the crate and he opened the crate. Inside were 4 different sized balls. Right, said Wood. Now, Quidditch is easy enough to understand, even if it's not too easy to play. There are 7 players on each side. 3 of them are called chasers. 3 chasers, Harry repeated, as Wood took out a bright red ball about the size of a soccer ball. This ball is called the quaffle, said Wood. The chasers throw the quaffle to each other and try and get it through one of the hoops to score a goal. 10 points every time the quaffle goes through one of the hoops. Follow me? The chasers throw the quaffle and put it through the hoops to score, Harry recited. So that's sort of like basketball on broomsticks with 6 hoops, isn't it? What's basketball? Said Wood curiously. Never mind, said Harry quickly. Now, there's another player on each side who's called the keeper. I'm keeper for Gryffindor. I have to fly around our hoops and stop the other team from scoring. 3 chasers, 1 keeper, said Harry, who was determined to remember it all. And they play with a quaffle. Okay, got that. So what are they for? He pointed at the 3 balls left inside the box. I'll show you now, said Wood. Take this. He handed Harry a small club, a bit like a short baseball bat. I'm going. Sorry. I'm going to show you now, said Wood. Take this. He handed Harry a small club, a bit like a short baseball bat. I'm going to show you what the bludgers do. Wood said, These 2 are bludgers. He showed Harry 2 identical balls, jet black and slightly smaller than the red quaffle. Harry noticed that they seemed to be straining to escape the straps holding them inside the box. Stand back, Wood warned Harry. He bent down and freed one of the bludgers. At once, the black ball rose high in the air and then pelted straight at Harry's face. Harry swung at it with the bat to stop it from breaking his nose and sent it zigzagging away into the air. It zoomed around their heads and then shot at Wood, who dived on top of it and managed to pin it to the ground. See? Wood panted, forcing the struggling bludger back into the crate and strapping it down safely. The bludgers rocket around, trying to knock players off their brooms. That's why you have 2 beaters on each team. The Weasley twins are ours. It's their job to protect their side from the bludgers and try and knock them towards the other team. So, think you've got it all? 3 chasers try and score with a quaffle. The keeper guards the goalposts. The beaters keep the bludgers away from their team. Harry reeled off. Very good, said Wood. Have the bludgers ever killed anyone? Harry asked, hoping he didn't sound offhand. Never at Hogwarts. We've had a couple of broken jaws, but nothing worse than that. Now, the last member of the team is the Seeker. That's you. And you don't have to worry about the quaffle or the bludgers, unless they crack my head open. Don't worry, the Weasleys are more than a match for the bludgers. I mean, they're like a pair of human bludgers themselves. Wood reached into the crate and took out the 4th and last ball. Compared with the quaffle and the bludgers, it was tiny, about the size of a large walnut. It was bright gold and had little fluttering silver wings. This, said Wood, is the golden snitch, and it is the most important ball of the lot. It's very hard to catch because it's so fast and difficult to see. It's the seeker's job to catch it. You've got to weave in and out of the chasers, beaters, bludgers, and quaffle to get it, before the other team's seeker, because whatever seeker catches the snitch wins his team an extra 150 points, so they nearly always win. That's why seekers get fouled so much. A game of Quidditch only ends with the snitch when the snitch is caught, so it can go on for ages. I think the record is 3 months. They had to keep bringing on substitutes so the players could get some sleep. Well, that's it. Any questions? Harry shook his head. He understood what he had to do, all right. It was doing it that was going to be the problem. We won't practice with the snitch yet, said Wood carefully, shutting it back into the crate. It's too dark. We might lose it. Let's try you out with a few of these. He pulled a bag of ordinary golf balls out of his pocket, and a few minutes later, he and Harry were up in the air, Wood throwing the golf balls as hard as he could in every direction for Harry to catch. Harry didn't miss a single one, and Wood was delighted. After half an hour, night had really fallen and they couldn't carry on. That Quidditch couple have our name on it this year, said Wood happily as they trudged back to the castle. I wouldn't be surprised if you turn out better than Charlie Weasley, and he couldn't have played for England if he hadn't gone off chasing dragons. Perhaps it was because he was now so busy with the Quidditch practices 3 evenings a week, on top of all his homework, but Harry couldn't hardly believe it when he realized that he'd already been at Hogwarts 2 months. That castle felt more like home than the Privet Drive had. His lessons, too, were becoming more and more interesting now that they had mastered the basics. On Halloween morning, they woke to the delicious smell of baking pumpkin wafting through the corridors. Even better, Professor Flitwick announced in charms that he thought they were ready to start making objects fly, something they had all been dying to try since they'd seen him make Neville's toad zoom around the classroom. Professor Flitwick put the class into pairs to practice. Harry's partner was Seamus Finnegan, which was a relief because Neville had been trying to catch his eye. Ron, however, was to be working with Hermione Granger. It was hard to tell whether Ron or Hermione was angrier about this. She hadn't spoken to either of them since the day Harry's broomstick had arrived. Now, don't forget that nice wrist movement we've been practicing, squeaked Professor Flitwick, perched on top of his pile of books as usual. Swish and flick. Remember, swish and flick. And saying that magic words properly is very important, too. Never forget Wizard Barfio, who said S instead of F and found himself on the floor with a buffalo on his chest. It was very difficult. Harry and Seamus swished and flicked, but the feather they were supposed to be sending skyward just lay on the desktop. Seamus got so impatient that he prodded it with his wand and set fire to it. Harry had to put it out with his hat. Ron, at the next table, wasn't having much more luck. Wingardium Leviosa! He shouted, waving his long arms like a windmill. You're saying it wrong! Harry heard Hermione snap. It's Wingardium Leviosa! Make the gar nice and long! You do it then if you're so clever, Ron snarled. Hermione rolled up the sleeves of her gown, flicked her wand, and said, Wingardium Leviosa! Their feather rose off the desk and hovered about 4 feet above their heads. Oh, well done, said Professor Flitwick, clapping. Everyone, see here, Miss Granger's done it! Ron was in a very bad mood by the end of the class. It's no wonder no one could stand her, he said to Harry as they pushed their way into the crowded corridor. She's a nightmare, honestly. Someone knocked into Harry as they hurried past him. It was Hermione. Harry caught a glimpse of her face and was startled to see that it was in tears. I think she heard you. So, said Ron, but he looked a bit uncomfortable. She must have noticed she's got no friends. Hermione didn't turn up for the next class and wasn't seen all afternoon. On their way down to the Great Hall for Halloween feast, Harry and Ron overheard Parvati Patil telling her friend, Lavender, that Hermione was crying in the girls' bathroom and wanted to be left alone. Ron looked still more awkward at this, but at a moment later, they had entered the Great Hall, where the Halloween decorations put Hermione out of their minds. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceilings, while 1,000 more swooped over the tables in long, low black clouds, making the candles and the pumpkins stutter. The feast appeared suddenly on the golden plates as it had at the start of term banquet. Harry was just helping himself to a baked potato when Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared at him as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair and slumped against the table and gasped, "Troll in the dungeon! Thought you ought to know." He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. There was an uproar. It took several purple firecrackers exploding from the end of Professor Dumbledore's wand to bring silence. "Prefects," he rumbled, "lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." Percy was in his element. "Follow me, stick together, first years. No need to fear the troll if you follow my orders. Stay close behind me now. Make way, first years coming through. Excuse me, I'm a prefect." "How could a troll get in?" Harry asked as they climbed the stairs. "Don't ask me, they're supposed to be really stupid," said Ron. "Maybe Peeves let it in for a Halloween joke." They passed different groups of people hurrying in different directions as they jostled their way through the crowd of confused Hufflepuffs. Harry suddenly grabbed Ron's arms. "I've just thought. Hermione." "What about her?" "She doesn't know about the troll." Ron bit his lip. "Oh, all right," he snapped, "but Percy'd better not see us." Ducking down, they joined the Hufflepuffs going the other way, slipped down the deserted corridor, and hurried off toward the girls' bathroom. They had just turned the corner when they heard quick footsteps behind them. "Percy!" hissed Ron, pulling Harry behind a large stone griffin. Peering around it, however, they saw not Percy, but Snape. He crossed the corridor and disappeared from view. "What's he doing?" Harry whispered. "Why isn't he down in the dungeons with the rest of the teachers?" "Search me." Quietly as possible, they crept along the next corridor after Snape's fading footsteps. "He's heading for the third floor," Harry said, but Ron held up his hand. "Can you smell something?" Harry sniffed, and a foul stench reached his nostrils, a mixture of old socks and the kind of public toilet no one seems to clean. And then they heard it, a low grunting and the shuffling footsteps of gigantic feet. Ron pointed at the end of a passage to the left. Something huge was moving toward them. They shrank into the shadows and watched it as it emerged into a patch of moonlight. It was a horrible sight. 12 feet tall, its skin was a dull granite gray, its great lumpy body like a boulder, and its small bald head perched on top of it like a coconut. It had short legs thick as tree trunks, with flat, horny feet. The smell coming from it was incredible. It was holding a huge wooden club that dragged along the floor because its arms were so long. The troll stopped next to the doorway and peered inside. It waggled its long ears, making up its tiny mind, then slouched slowly into the room. "The key's in its lock," Harry muttered. "We could lock it." "Good idea," said Ron nervously. They edged toward the open door, mouths dry, praying the troll wasn't about to come out of it. With one great leap, Harry managed to grab the key and slam the door and lock it. Yes! Flushed with their victory, they started to run back up the passageway, but as they reached the corner, they heard something that made their hearts stop. A high, petrified scream, and it was coming from the chamber they had just chained up. "Oh no," said Ron, pale as the Bloody Baron. "It's the girls' bathroom!" Harry gasped. "Hermione!" they said together. It was the last thing they wanted to do, but what choice did they have? Wheeling around, they sprinted back to the door and turned the key, fumbling in their panic. Harry pulled the door open and they ran inside. Hermione Granger was shrinking against the wall opposite, looking as if she was about to faint. The troll was advancing on her, knocking the sticks off the walls as the sinks off the walls as it went. "Confuse it," Harry said desperately to Ron, and seizing a tap, he threw it as hard as he could against the wall. The troll stopped a few feet away from Hermione. It lumbered around, blinking stupidly to see what had made the noise. Its mean little eyes saw Harry. It hesitated, then made for him instead, lifting its club as it went. "Oi, pea-brain!" yelled Ron from the other side of the chamber. He threw a metal pipe at it. The troll didn't seem to notice the pipe hitting its shoulder, but it heard the yell and paused again, turning its ugly snout towards Ron instead, giving Harry time to run around it. "Come on, run, run!" Harry yelled at Hermione, trying to pull her towards the door, but she couldn't move. She was still flat against the wall, her mouth open with terror. The shouting and the echoes seemed to be driving the troll mad. Berserk. It roared again and started towards Ron, who was the nearest, and had no way to escape. Harry then did something that was both very brave and very stupid. He took a great running jump and managed to fasten his arms around the troll's neck from behind. The troll couldn't feel Harry hanging there, but even a troll would notice if you stick a long bit of wood up its nose, and Harry's wand had been in his hand when he jumped. It had gone straight up the troll's nostrils. Howling with pain, the troll twisted and flailed his club with Harry clinging on for dear life. Any second, the troll was going to rip him off or catch him in a terrible bow with his club. Hermione had sunk to the floor in fright. Ron pulled out his own wand, not knowing what he was going to do. He heard himself cry the first spell that came into his head. Wingardium Leviosa! The club flew suddenly out of the troll's hand, rose high, high up into the air, turned slowly over, and dropped, with a sickening crack, onto its owner's head. The troll swayed onto the spot, and then fell flat on its face, with a thud that made the whole room tremble. Harry got to his feet. He was shaking and out of breath. Ron was standing there, with his wand still raised, staring at what he had done. It was Hermione who spoke first. "Is it dead?" "I don't think so," said Harry. "I think it's just been knocked out." He bent down and pulled his wand out of the troll's nose. It was covered in what looked like lumpy gray goo. Ugh, troll boogers. He wiped it on the troll's trousers. A sudden slamming and loud footsteps made the three of them look up. They hadn't realized what a racket they had been making, but of course, someone downstairs must have heard the crashes and troll's roars. A moment later, Professor McGonagall had come bursting into the room, closely followed by Snape, with Quirrell bringing up the rear. Quirrell took one look at the troll, let out a faint whimper, and sat quickly down on a toilet, clutching at his heart. Snape bent down over the troll. Professor McGonagall was looking at Ron and Harry. Harry had never seen her look so angry. Her lips were white. Hopes of winning 50 house points for Gryffindor faded quickly from Harry's mind. "What on earth were you thinking of?" said Professor McGonagall, with cold fury in her voice. Harry looked at Ron, who was still standing with his wand in the air. "You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitories?" Sorry. God. Snape gave Harry a swift, piercing look. Harry looked at the floor. He wished Ron would put his wand down. Then a small voice came out of the shadows. "Please, Professor McGonagall, they were looking for me." "Miss Granger?" Hermione had managed to get to her feet at last. I went looking for the troll because I thought I could deal with it on my own, because I've read all about them." Ron dropped his wand. Hermione Granger telling a downright lie to a teacher. "If they hadn't found me, I'd be dead now." Harry stuck his wand up its nose, and Ron knocked it out with his own club. "They didn't have time to come and fetch anyone. It was about to finish me off when they had arrived." Harry and Ron tried to look as though this story wasn't new to them. "Well, in that case," said Professor McGonagall, staring at the three of them, "Miss Granger, you foolish girl, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own?" Hermione hung her head. Harry was speechless. Hermione was the last person to do anything against the rules, and here she was pretending she had, to get them out of trouble. It was as if Snape had started handing out sweets. "Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor from this," said Professor McGonagall. "I am very disappointed in you. If you're not her at all, you better get off to Gryffindor Tower. Students are finishing their feasts in their houses." Hermione left. Professor McGonagall turned to Harry and Ron. "Well, I'll still say you were lucky, but not many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. You each win Gryffindor 5 points. Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go." They hurried out of the chamber and didn't speak at all until they had climbed 2 floors up. It was a relief to be away from the smell of the troll, quite apart from anything else. "We should have gotten more than 10 points," Ron grumbled. 5, you mean, once she'd taken off Hermione's. "Good of her to get us out of trouble like that," Ron admitted. "Mind you, we did save her. She might not have been needed saving if we hadn't locked the thing in with her, Harry reminded him. They had reached the portrait of the fat lady. "Pig snout," they said, and entered. The common room was packed and noisy. Everyone was eating the food that had been sent up. Hermione, however, stood alone by the door, waiting for them. There was a very embarrassed pause. Then none of them, looking at each other, they all said thanks and hurried off to get plates. But from that moment on, Hermione Granger became their friend. There are some things you can't share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. Chapter 11, Quidditch. As they entered November, the weather turned very cold. The mountains around the school became icy gray, and the lake like chilled steel. Every morning the ground was covered in frost. Hagrid could be seen from the upstairs window defrosting broomsticks on the Quidditch field, bundled up in a long moleskin overcoat, rabbit fur gloves, and an enormous beaverskin boots. The Quidditch season had begun. On Saturday, Harry would be playing in his first match after weeks of training, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. If Gryffindor won, they would move up into second place in the house championship. Hardly anyone had seen Harry play because Wood had decided that, as their secret weapon, Harry should be kept, well, secret. But the news that he was playing Seeker had leaked out somehow, and Harry didn't know which was worse, people telling him he'd be brilliant, or people telling him that be running around underneath him holding a mattress. It was really lucky that Harry now had Hermione as a friend. He didn't know how had gotten through all of his homework without her. What with all the last-minute Quidditch practice Wood was making them do, she had also lent him Quidditch Through the Ages, which turned out to be a very interesting read. Harry learned that there were 700 ways of committing a Quidditch foul, and that all of them had happened during a World Cup match in 1473, that Seekers were usually the smallest and fastest players, and the most serious Quidditch accident seemed to happen to them, that although people rarely died playing Quidditch, referees have been known to vanish and turn up months later in the Sahara Desert. Hermione had become a bit more relaxed about breaking rules since Harry and Ron had saved her from the mountain troll, and she was much nicer for it. The day before Harry's first Quidditch match, the three of them were out in the freezing courtyard during break, and she had conjured them up a bright blue fire that could be carried around in a jam jar. They were standing with their backs to it, getting warm, when Snape crossed the yard. Harry noticed at once that Snape was limping. Harry and Ron and Hermione moved closer together to block the fire from view. They were sure wouldn't be allowed. Unfortunately, something about their guilty faces caught Snape's eye. He limped over. He hadn't seen the fire, but he seemed to be looking for a reason to tell them off. "What's that you've got there, Potter?" "It was Quidditch Through the Ages," Harry showed him. "Library books are not to be taken outside the school," said Snape. "Give it to me. 5 points from Gryffindor." "He just made that rule up," Harry muttered angrily as Snape limped away. "Wonder what's wrong with his leg." "Dunno, but I hope it's really hurting him," said Ron bitterly. The Gryffindor common room was very noisy that evening. Harry and Ron and Hermione sat together next to the window. Hermione was checking Harry and Ron's charms homework for them. She would never let them copy "How will you learn?" but by asking her to read it through, they got the right answers anyway. Harry felt restless. He wanted Quidditch Through the Ages back, to take his mind off his nerves about tomorrow. What should well, sorry. Why should he be afraid of Snape getting up? Why should he be afraid of Snape? Getting up, he told Ron and Hermione he was going to ask Snape if he could have it back. "Better than you than me," they said together. But Harry had an idea that Snape wouldn't refuse if there were other teachers listening. He made his way down to the staff room and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Perhaps Snape had left the book in there. It was worth a try. He pushed the door ajar and peered inside, and a horrible scene met his eyes. Snape and Filch were inside alone. Snape was holding his robes above his knee. One of his legs was bloody and mangled. Filch was handing Snape bandages. "Blasted thing," Snape was saying. "How are you supposed to keep your eye on all three heads at once?" Harry tried to shut the door quietly, but "Potter!" Snape's face was twisted with fury, and he dropped his robes quickly to hide his leg. Harry gulped. "I just wonder if I could have my book back." "Get out! Out!" Harry laughed before Snape could take any more points from Gryffindor. He sprinted back upstairs. "Did you get it?" Ron asked, as Harry joined them. "What's the matter?" In a low whisper, Harry told them what he had seen. "You know what that means?" he finished breathlessly. He tried to get past the three-headed dog at Halloween. That's where he was going when we saw him. He's after whatever it's guarding. And I bet my broomstick he left the troll in to make a diversion. Hermione's eyes were wide. No, he wouldn't, she said. I know he's not very nice, but he wouldn't try and steal something Dumbledore was keeping safe. Honestly, Hermione, you think all teachers are saints or something, snapped Ron. I'm with Harry. I wouldn't put anything past Snape. But what's he after? What's the dog guarding? Harry went to bed with his head buzzing with the same questions. Neville was snoring loudly, but Harry couldn't sleep. He tried to empty his mind. He needed to sleep. He had he had his first Quidditch match in a few hours, but the expression on Snape's face when Harry had seen his leg wasn't easy to forget. The next morning dawned very bright and cold. The great hall was full of the delicious smells of fried sausages and the cheerful chatter of everyone looking forward to a good Quidditch match. Hold up, I'm gonna look to see how long this chapter is. Okay. You've got to eat some breakfast. I don't want anything. Just a bit of toast, wheedled Hermione. I'm not hungry. Harry felt terrible. In an hour's time, he'd be walking onto the field. Harry, you need your strength, said Seamus Finnegan. Seekers are always the one who gets clobbered by the other team. Thanks, Seamus, said Harry, watching Seamus' pal catch up on his sausages. By 11 o'clock, the whole school seemed to be out in the stands around the Quidditch pitch. Many students had binoculars. The seats might be raised high in the air, but it was still difficult to see what was going on sometimes. Ron and Hermione joined Neville, Seamus, and Dean, the West Ham fan, up in the top row. A surprise for Harry, they had painted a large banner on one of the sheets Scabbers had ruined. It was Potter for President. It said Potter for President. And Dean, who was good at drawing, had done a large Gryffindor lion underneath. Then Hermione had performed a tricky little charm so the paint flashed different colors. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Harry and the rest of the team were changing into the scarlet Quidditch robes. Slytherin would be playing in green. Wood cleared his throat for silence. Okay, men, he said. And women, said Chaser Angelina Johnson. And women, Wood agreed. This is it. The big one, said Fred Weasley. The one we've all been waiting for, said George. We know Oliver's speech by heart, Fred told Harry. We were on the team last year. Shut up, you two, said Wood. This is the best Gryffindor team we've had in years. We're going to win, I know it. He glared at all of them as if to say, or else. Right, it's time. Good luck, all of you. Harry followed Fred and George out of the locker room and hoping his knees weren't going to give way, walked onto the field to loud cheers. Madame Hooch was refereeing. She stood in the middle of the field, waiting for the two teams, her broom in her hand. Now, I want a nice fair game, all of you, she said, once they were all gathered around her. Harry noticed that she seemed to be speaking particularly to the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, a sixth year. Harry thought Flint looked as if he had some troll blood in him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the fluttering banner high above, flashing Potter for President over the crowd. His heart skipped. He felt braver. Mount your brooms, please. Harry clambered onto his Nimbus 2000. Madame Hooch gave a loud blast on her silver whistle. 15 brooms rose high, high into the air. They were off. And the quaffle was taken immediately by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. What an excellent chaser that girl is, and rather attractive, too. Jordan? Sorry, Professor. The Weasley twins' friend, Lee Jordan, was doing the commentary for the match, closely watched by Professor McGonagall. And she's really belting along up there. A neat pass to Alicia Spinnet, a good find of Oliver. I'm gonna restart that sentence. And she's really belting up there. A neat pass to Alicia Spinnet, a good find of Oliver Woods last year, only a reserve. Back to Johnson, and no, the Slytherin have taken the quaffle. Slytherin Captain Marcus Flint gains the quaffle, and off he goes. Flint flying like an eagle up there. He's going to stopped by an excellent move by Gryffindor keeper Wood, and Gryffindors take the quaffle. That's Chaser Katie Bell of Gryffindor there. Nice dive around Flint, off up the field, and Ouch! That must have hurt. Hit in the back of the head by a bludger. Quaffle taken by Slytherin. That's Adrian Pusey, speeding off towards the goalpost, but he's blocked by a second bludger, sent his way by Fred or George Weasley. Can't tell which. Nice play to the Gryffindor beater. Anyway, and Johnson, back in possession of the Quaffle, a clear field ahead, and off she goes. She's really flying, dodges a speeding bludger. The goalposts are ahead. Come on now, Angelina, keep Bletchley dives. Keeper Bletchley dives. Misses. Gryffindor scores! Gryffindor cheers filled the cold air with howls and moans from the Slytherins. Budge up there, move along. Hagrid! Ron and Hermione squeezed together to give Hagrid enough space to join them. Been watching from me hut, said Hagrid, patting a large pair of binoculars around his neck. But it isn't the same as being in the crowd. No sign of Snitch yet, eh? Nope, said Ron. Harry hasn't had much to do yet. Kept out of trouble, though, that's something, said Hagrid, raising his binoculars and peering skyward at the speck that was Harry. Way up above them, Harry was gliding over the game, squinting above for any sign of the Snitch. This was part of his and Wood's game plan. Keep out of the way until you catch sight of the Snitch, Wood had said. We don't want you attacked before you have to be. When Angelina had scored, Harry had done a couple of loop-de-loops that to let off his feelings. Now he was back to staring around for the Snitch. Once he caught slight flash of gold, but it was just the reflection from one of the Weasleys' wristwatches. And once a bludger decided to come pelting his way more like a cannonball than anything, but Harry dodged it, and Fred Weasley came chasing after it. All right there, Harry! He had time to yell as he beat the bludger fiercely towards Backer's flinch. So they're in possession, Lee Jordan was saying. Chaser Pusey ducks two bludgers, two Weasleys, and the chaser ball, and speeds towards the... Wait a moment, was that the Snitch? A murmur ran through the crowd as Adrian Pusey dropped the quaffle, too busy looking over his shoulder, the flash of gold that had passed his left ear. Harry saw it. In a great rush of excitement, he dived downward after the streak of gold. Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs had seen it, too. Neck and neck, they hurtled toward the Snitch. All the chasers seemed to have forgotten what they were supposed to be doing, as they hung in midair to watch. Harry was faster than Higgs. He could see the little round ball wings fluttering, darting up ahead. He put on an extra spurt of speed. Wham! A roar of rage echoed from the Gryffindors below. Marcus Flint had blocked Harry on purpose, and Harry's broom spun off course, Harry holding on for dear life. Foul! Screamed the Gryffindors. Madame Hooch spoke angrily to Flint, and then ordered a free shot at the goal post for Gryffindor. But in all the confusion, of course, the Golden Snitch had disappeared from sight. Down in the stands, Dean Thomas was yelling, "Send him off! Red card!" What are you talking about, Dean? Said Ron. Red card, said Dean fiercely. In a soccer, you get shown the red card and you're out of the game. But this isn't soccer, Dean, Ron reminded him. Hagrid, however, was on Dean's side. They ought to change the rules. Flint could have knocked Harry out of the air. Lee Jordan was finding it difficult not to take sides. So after the obvious and disgusting bit of cheating, Jordan, growled Professor McGonagall. I mean, after the open and revolting foul, Jordan, I'm warning you. All right. Flint nearly kills the Gryffindor Seeker, which could have happened to anyone. I'm sure. So a penalty to Gryffindor taken by Spinnet, who puts it away, no trouble, and we continue play. Gryffindor still in possession. It was as Harry dodged another bludger, which went spinning dangerously past his head, that it happened. His broom gave a sudden, frightening lurch. For a split second, he thought he was going to fall. He gripped the brooms tightly with both his hands and knees. He never felt anything like that. It happened again. It was as though the broom was trying to buck him off. But Nimbus 2000s did not suddenly decide to buck their riders off. Harry tried to turn back toward the Gryffindor goalpost. He had half a mind to ask Wood to call timeout, and then he realized that his broom was completely out of his control. He couldn't turn it. He couldn't direct it at all. It was zigzagging through the air and every now and then making violent swishing movements that almost unseated him. Lee was still commenting. So they're in possession. Flint with the quaffle, passes Spinnet, passes Bell, hit hard in the face by a bludger. Hope he broke his nose. Only joking, Professor. Slytherin score. Oh no. The Slytherin The Slytherins were cheering. No one seemed to have noticed that Harry's broom was behaving strangely. It was carrying him slowly higher and away from the game, jerking and twitching as it went. Don't know what Harry thinks he's doing, Hagrid mumbled. He stared through his binoculars. If I didn't know better, I'd say he'd lost control of his broom, but he can't have. Suddenly, people were pointing up at Harry, all over the stands. His broom had started to roll over and over with him, only just managing to hold on. Then the whole crowd gasped. Harry's broom had given a wild jerk, and Harry was swung off of it. He was now dangling from it, holding on with only one hand. Did something happen to it when Flint blocked him? Seamus whispered. Can't have, Hagrid said, his voice shaking. Can't nothing interfere with a broomstick except powerful dark magic. No kid could do that to a Nimbus 2000. At these words, Hermione seized Hagrid's binoculars, but instead of looking up at Harry, she stared looking frantically in the crowd. What are you doing? Moaned Ron, grey-faced. I knew it, Hermione gasped. Snape, look. Ron grabbed the binoculars. Snape was in the middle of the stands opposite them. He had his eyes fixed on Harry and was muttering nonstop under his breath. He's doing something, jinxing the broom, said Hermione. What should we do? Leave it to me. Before Ron could say another word, Hermione had disappeared. Ron turned the binoculars back on Harry. His broom was vibrating so hard it was almost impossible for him to hang on much longer. The whole crowd was on its feet, watching terrified as the Weasley flew up to try and pull Harry safely onto one of their brooms, but it was no good. Every time they got near him, the broom would jump higher still. They dropped lower and circled beneath him, obviously hoping to catch him if he had fell. Marcus Flint seized the quaffle and scored 5 times without anyone noticing. Come on, Hermione, said Ron, muttered desperately. Hermione had fought her way across to the stands where Snape stood and was now racing along the row behind him. She didn't even stop to say sorry as she knocked Professor Quirrell headfirst into the row in front. Reaching Snape, she crouched down, pulled out her wand, and whispered a few well-chosen words. Bright blue flame shot from her wand into the hem of Snape's robes. It took perhaps 30 seconds for Snape not to realize that he was on fire. A sudden yelp told her she had done her job. Scooping the fire off him into a little jar in her pocket, she scrambled back along the row. Snape would never know what had happened. It was enough. Up in the air, Harry was suddenly able to clamber back onto his broom. Neville, you can look, Ron said. Neville had been sobbing into Hagrid's jacket for the last 5 minutes. Harry was speeding toward the ground when the crowd saw him clap his hand to his mouth as though he had thought he'd be sick. He hit the ground in all fours, coughed, and something gold flew out of his mouth. Out of his mouth into his hand. I've got the snitch, he shouted, waving it above his head, and the game ended in complete confusion. He didn't catch it. He nearly swallowed it. Flint was still howling 20 minutes later, but it made no difference. Harry hadn't broken any rules, and Lee Jordan was still happily shouting the results. Gryffindor had won by 170 points to 60. Harry heard none of this, though. He was being made a cup of strong tea back in Hagrid's hut, with Ron and Hermione. It was Snape, Ron was explaining. Hermione and I saw him. He was cursing your broom, muttering he wouldn't take his eyes off of you. Rubbish, said Hagrid, who hadn't heard a word of what had gone on next to him in the stands. Why would Snape do something like that? Harry and Ron and Hermione looked at one another, wondering what to tell him. Harry decided on the truth. I found something out about him, he told Hagrid. He tried to get past that 3-headed dog at Halloween. It bit him. We think it was trying to steal whatever it's guarding. Hagrid dropped the teapot. How do you know about Fluffy? He said. Fluffy? Yeah, he's mine. Bought him off a Greek chappie I met in the pub last year. I led him to Dumbledore to guard the... Yes, said Harry eagerly. Now don't ask me any more, said Hagrid gruffly. That's top secret, that is. And Snape's trying to steal it. Rubbish, said Hagrid again. Snape's a Hogwarts teacher. He'd do nothing of the sort. So why did he just try to kill Harry? Cried Hermione. The afternoon's events certainly seemed to have changed her mind about Snape. I know a jinx when I see one, Hagrid. I've read all about them. You've got to keep eye contact, and Snape wasn't blinking at all. I saw him. I'm telling you, you're wrong, said Hagrid hotly. I don't know why Harry's broom acted like that, but Snape wouldn't try and kill a student. Now listen to me, all 3 of you. You're meddling in things that don't concern you. It's dangerous. You forget that dog, and you forget what it's guarding. That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. Aha! Said Harry. So there's someone called Nicholas Flamel involved. Is there? Hagrid looked furious with himself. Alright, that's the end of the chapter, and where I'm going to end this reading. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. We'll be continuing next time on chapter 12 to 13. Hope you have a nice evening, day, whatever time it is there. Bye!